Well, hello, and a very warm welcome back to the Andrew Eborn Show with me, Andrew Eborn. I'm delighted to be joined yet again by Edward.Oakenfull. Edward, we've been unpacking the reasons why you deserted Advance UK, basically due to frustration about the way it's run. What have you noticed the difference about Restore?
I would just like to counter that. It's not about, it is about frustration, yes. But I absolutely love my country and I just want to do the best for my country. And for me, the only game in town is Restore Britain. It's a massive juggernaut. It's gained so much traction in a really short space of time. That proves something. We all need to get together in under one umbrella, one entity, and for me, the one entity is Restore Britain. So that's why in your words, deserted.
I think there are a number of things that we touched on beforehand. I mean, when we look at the policies, and I think it's worth sort of digging into these because Advance UK took time to basically formulate some policies which they outlined at that London event not so long ago at the end of last year. Ben himself said there's only a sort of cigarette paper between Advance UK and Restore. I think it's worth looking at the policies and maybe highlighting some of the difference, and you can help us with these as we look at these. I mean, small boats, let's start with those. They've been pouring in over 41,000 last year alone, and Labour's smash the gangs pledge is sort of collapsing, really. Be specific then, Edward. How would Restore Britain stop the boats on day one? What would you do?
This is Restore Britain. How I see it is that on day one, those small boats will be just towed back to France, and they'll be plonked back on the beach where they came from. And it's an outrage that we're just in French waters picking them up and bringing them to Britain. I think it's just a disgrace to an embarrassment to our country. So Restore Britain would just be just taking them back to France. It'll cause the French to go absolutely ballistic. There'll be a massive incident. But maybe we cancel a few fishing licenses and escalate it. We certainly wouldn't be paying them £500 million a year to the French to be stopping this invasion. We need to get tough and serious with this.
You'd leave the ECHR immediately.
We're in a massive legal straitjacket. There are all sorts of conventions that successive governments, not just the Conservatives, Labour, that have signed us up to these issues. That we have all these outrageous. We can never deport anybody because of all sorts of trivial things that their lawyers find. So yeah, there's all sorts of legislation, the European Court of Human Rights, lots of human rights legislation. There's a migration compact that we're signed up to. There's loads of legislation that we need to repeal and get out of and get rid of.
So
Get our
your
country
policy would
back.
be take them back to France. Ben was trapped, if you like, by Julia Hartley Brewer.
He was.
And I put this to him. I say I like to be fair. I don't want to trap anybody. It's making sure their views are well represented. I may not agree with those views, but at least make sure they say directly. Remind us exactly what Ben said and how you would deal with that situation.
I think Julia Brewer just kept pressing and pressing and talked about would you board the boats and bend, there are boats that you can't actually sink that are massive inflatable boats that can't be sunk. And what happens if you board the boat and somebody falls in the water? Well, you're always going to rescue them. We're not not going to let them drown. So
Well, Ben, just to pick you up on that, and this is, as I
and
say,
we don't
led
want
to that
anybody
moment.
to drown.
Yeah. Hey,
Yeah.
what Ben said, they were stabbing the boat so that they were in the water, and the response was "let them drown," and that then became viral.
I don't think he meant to say that, and I just think it was just clipped and it was just taken out of context. Nobody wants anybody to drown. That's just not what we're about.
So what would you do
Um,
then? What would you do as part of restoring that
you're
situation?
going trying to get me on the same path, aren't you? And
No, 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 not at all. No, no. I'm just saying, what would you do? No path at all. I think merely making sure that your views are properly represented. What would you do?
In what respect? You mean if there
Well,
was a boat
they're in
coming
the
in?
water. This is the thing. You talk about taking them back to France. But what would you do?
Sorry, they're in the water and
Well, so
it,
so Julia Hartley-Brewer's point
They
was
made it across. They made it across the channel into British territorial waters.
well, no, I guess they're in the water already. Yes, exactly. What would you do?
You'd pick them up. I would pick them up and take them over to France and plonk them
Okay,
on a beach in
that's,
France.
see, that was easy, wasn't it? So, as I say, there's no trap at all. It's just making sure those views are properly represented. And I think that's the problem. So often, the media is all about sensationalizing everything. And I'd rather that people have a sensible debate and talk about things. And you're right, when you put it in a particular way, there are always extreme examples, and
That's why
some.
these long format interviews are so good. I look at the mainstream media and, like you say, Andrew, they're looking for a gotcha. They're looking for to make that particular journalist to make themselves a name and to embarrass somebody. But yeah, let's talk about things and elaborate and allow the guest to speak rather than yeah.
I always do that, as you know. As I say, I don't necessarily support all the views of my guests, absolutely not. But that's democracy. What I will do is make sure they're not misrepresented,
Yeah.
and that's so
And
important.
that's why I love coming on the Andrew Eborn Show. You're always so fair, and people accuse you of giving me a grilling in the past, and no, it's fair game, and I think it's just great to discuss these ideas.
Yeah, and I think, and that's what happened when you came on. And to your credit, you came on after the disaster of that by-election. And people did say, they say I gave you a grilling, and everybody, but you turn around and say, rightly, look, those are the questions that people wanted answered.
Yeah, and it's fair enough. And I view you as a very fair journalist, and yeah, interviewer.
And I think that's important. As I say, that's what I want to do, make sure people's views are properly represented. Because so often in the media, it's that sensationalism where people misrepresent, or they don't even bother asking them. They just assume this is what they would say. I want to look at some of these other policies. You talk about Restore, talk about mass deportations. That's its sort of flagship policy. The headline, which the media, we talk about headlines, millions will have to go. That's what they talk about. Walk me through the logistics of what that means in practice. How many illegal migrants and failed asylum seekers do you realistically deport in the first term? How do you fund that? You're the treasurer of Advance, or you were the treasurer. You understand money. And how do you build the detention infrastructure and so on and so forth? So look at those specifics. And maybe would you include foreign criminals with British-born children, or no exceptions whatsoever? Lots of things to unpack on that. Give me your
Wow,
input
the
on that.
practicalities of getting rid of so many. I mean, first of all, the sheer numbers of illegals in this country I think the official government estimates are 1.2 million. But then you look at supermarket sales of food, and then you look at water companies and how much water is being consumed. And the sheer number of illegals it's got to be way north of 1.2 million people. So the sheer numbers, we're talking several million, maybe. Who knows? Nobody knows. The practicalities of getting rid of so many people out of our country. I mean, you could start with the prisons. You've got convicted criminals in our prisons. I think it's over 10,000 people, the foreign-born criminals that could be deported. So you start with those. I also believe the welfare system. Anybody that's foreign-born, why the hell should British people be going out to work and duly paying their taxes to pay for welfare for people that are foreign that are not part of this country? So there's many hundreds of thousands, maybe I think 900,000 people on welfare that are foreign born. So if you cut their welfare and give them no money whatsoever and no assistance. And I would be damn tough on this. I don't want them to have a single penny from the British taxpayer. It should not be regurgitated by the government and given out in freebies to foreigners, which incidentally acts as a massive draw for more foreigners to come to the country. So you would also need to go into communities. In America, they've got they call it ICE, those ICE agents. So you're going to need a whole division of people that are dedicated to evicting people that should not be in our country, and just the logistics of that would be massive. So you'll have to set up a whole new department. As for holding these people, I would be just tough. I think maybe an island within on the Scottish Islands. I'd certainly have a enclosed area with razor wire and get the army patrolling it and keeping these people in a tent somewhere. That's all I would give them. So I'd be incredibly tough and very very. I think the British people have just had enough. Of this problem, and we're sick of generations of politicians that have talked tough and promised things and not delivered. And I believe in Rupert Lowe, and I believe in Restore Britain. Will be that tough party that will act firmly on this.
And the funding of it, then you say you'll make savings on welfare and so on and so forth. How else? Because millions deported, if that really is the headline, that's going to cost a lot of money.
Yeah, well, we're already spending billions and billions of pounds housing illegals that shouldn't even be in this country in the first place. So, I'd immediately kick them out of the hotels, put them in a tent in a field that the soldiers are guarding, and there's a couple of £1 billion there straight away that could be saved. So, massive savings. Like you say, the welfare. If you immediately cut the welfare of foreign-born people, there's many billions there that could be saved.
Okay. You are obviously treasurer at Advance UK, although you say effectively it was a bookkeeping role. Are you going to have a position within Restore?
I'm like anybody else. I've just signed on the dotted line to be part of Restore Britain, and I'm going through a vetting procedure that has just started off. I only joined yesterday, so I'm just like anybody else. I'm just a normal member of Restore Britain.
You say you go through a vetting procedure, so are you not yet a member?
I've joined, yes, as a member, yeah.
So what's the vetting procedure? Talk me through that at the
I've
stages.
applied for a position, and you have to be vetted out for it, and I'm going through the vetting procedure.
And what's the position you've applied for?
Um, just the basic wrong. I mean, I'm just there to help people out. I go out delivering leaflets. I'll go and knock on doors, and if Restore Britain see fit that they'll allocate me a branch, that would be, I'd happily set up a branch for them.
Right. So
I've
to
done it before.
become a
Yeah.
member, there's no vetting, but if you want a position to represent them in a particular area, you need to go through that procedure.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just before we talk about the finished deportations, would you include foreign criminals with British-born children, or no exceptions whatsoever?
It becomes a tough one, doesn't it? And it's a fine line. And if they've got children in this country, um, and and then there's this massive argument that was waging over X for weeks about ethnicity, and again, I think Ben got sidelined on that a little bit. Not a great move. I think we'd have to look at people that are born in this country, and it'd be difficult to deport those. Although Tom Honan in America said that we're going to deport the children as well of these families, so they shouldn't have been here in the first place.
But your personal views?
My personal views depends on how long they've been in the country, of course, and how established they are. But I've almost got no sympathies. The parents shouldn't have been in this country in the first place, and if they've had a child in this country, so what? They should be deported as well.
Okay.
It's a
Uh,
tough line, but I think
but
it's
no, I just getting your views. I think that's the important view. You can stand by that. One thing which I found abhorrent, you mentioned about ethnicity and so on and so forth, was the abuse that Ben got and the racial slurs.
oh,
And as you know, I always encourage debate, but when it degenerates into racist slurs or just throwing insults around and
yeah.
calling people names, it's abhorrent, isn't it?
It's just awful. And I looked at some of those, and I felt for Ben. It was just truly awful. Um,
Yeah. It is appalling, and as you say, for anybody, and I think it doesn't matter whatever political side it is. Let's have a proper debate about the issues, because so often, and I've made this point before, Edward, as well. It's not just because somebody on the right says this, somebody on the left has to say that. There are actually some common policies, some common decencies,
Yeah.
where people, and I quite like when Rupert said, "Look, the party political system is dead."
Mm. I think it's been dead for a long while. I think the civil service just do what they want, and ministers come and go, and you've got the civil service running the show. That have never been elected.
Yeah, and I think this
And,
is something which we do need that shake up. Let's
and,
have a
it, and it's
panel of experts, and I
and
quite like.
it's always been further devolved and watered down Parliament with these NGOs that have been set up and these quangos that have got so much power and so much public money that are completely unaccountable. So yeah, Parliament should be sovereign, and we need to get rid of all these, again, billions of pounds worth of money that's spent on these quangos, and politicians need to be doing the job that they're paid for.
One of the things Rupert's been focusing on, obviously, the grooming gangs, which have devastated thousands of British girls for decades, is what we're finding out. It appears that entire communities may have been turning a blind eye. What's the Restore Britain's hard policy on grooming gangs? Mandatory life sentences without parole, stripping citizenship from perpetrators and their families, or publicly naming of the cultural and religious patterns that establishments still refuse to admit? What do you think is going to be the next stage? What's going to happen with these grooming gangs, and what are the real issues that need to be addressed?
Yeah, and deporting any people convicted of these offences as well that have got a lot of them have got dual nationality. So it's a no-brainer to be deporting these people. I don't want these people in my country.
Well, there's two things
Um,
there. When you say deport, that's assuming that they are capable of being deported. And some people, then they will always say it's not just the Pakistani rape gangs, as they say. It is basically sometimes there are white middle class grooming gangs as well. What would you do in that situation?
I think we've got to get really tough. And Advance UK brought out a policy on sex crimes that we're going to be castrating people and severe sentences within prison. So I think our so-called justice system, we've for 50 years now, it's been liberal, and it's we've excuses for criminal behaviour. I'd like it to go the pendulum to swing severely back the other way, and be very, very tough sentences. And a lot of these people should never see the light of day. They should be incarcerated for the rest of their lives. I also believe that the death penalty should be restored. I believe this personally. I believe Restore's policy on this is to have a referendum, and I think that's the fairest way about this. I think we need a referendum on the death penalty. So I would go further on that.
And which crimes would you have the death penalty for?
Any if you're taking anybody else's life, murder.
Murder or manslaughter?
Um, uh, we're getting into legal definitions, and I'd have to look at a legal definition for this, Andrew. And
An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. On the grooming gang side, and it is important because sometimes people dismiss it as just a
So just
racist.
to rewind on that,
Yes.
I'm very much in favour of a referendum on the death penalty, and
Okay.
these points should be put to the public, and it's too big a subject for Parliament to deal with on its own, and so I'm very much in favour of a direct democracy, and let the people decide on that. So that murder and manslaughter and that definition should be put to the public. So that's where I am on that.
And I think on the grooming gangs, because that's where we started this conversation. I think it is important that it's not just one particular community and so on and so forth, the one ethnicity. There are others involved. And I think so often with these things, people dismiss again the arguments because they say, oh, it's coming from a racist basis. And I think with any inquiry, you have to have an open mind and say, okay, what are the facts? What are the statistics? Because a
Yeah.
lot of people do make the point that actually there are lots of white criminals as well. And it's abhorrent, whatever ethnicity. And that's what we need to do. We need to address the problem without approaching it with any particular prejudice.
And Andrew, give Rupert and Restore credit. these politicians, Nigel Farage, about over a year ago, talked that he would be having looking into this, and just political opportunists just took the opportunity to get some headlines and then just tossed it into the long grass, as have the Labour Party. The Labour Party talked about having an inquiry on grooming gangs, but we've seen no results in this. Rupert got a private funding and has actually got put his money where his mouth is, and he's actually doing it. And shame on all those other so-called politicians that didn't do anything.
It's talk and no action from the others. That's what people want. They want to see people taking action and doing the right thing. But I say without approaching it with any particular prejudice. I think the evidence is there. Work on the basis of evidence and try not to let that be clouded by prejudice. Net migration is still sky high. Housing is in crisis. We talked about the NHS being is
With
buckling basically.
housing, no wonder when we got millions of people coming to this country, or we have had millions of people. I mean, because so many people are leaving now, these are all highly productive people that are very successful, taking their money out of the country, closing businesses, selling up and leaving because they're overtaxed. But having so many people come to this country, that mass immigration has caused the housing crisis. No wonder we can never build enough houses for the so many with the open door immigration policies that we've had. So that's why you've got the massive housing crisis.
So do you support an immediate cap on all legal immigration, a move to net negative migration, or maybe an Australian-style point system that put British workers and wages first? And would you scrap student visas and family reunions that act as backdoors?
It's pathetic. Student bringing you're coming from a foreign country to university, and you bring in your relatives with you. It's just nonsense. So certainly be scrapping that. There's also so many of these universities that have been scams in effect, and the fake universities just to bring people over here. So yeah, I'd be absolutely ruthless with this. I think we'd still need the brightest and best to come to this country. So I'm not in favour of total having nobody allowed to come to this country. Some of our wonderful football clubs. I mean, some of the superstars that we have playing in the Premiership. I mean, that would be crazy not to invite the brightest and best and the best athletes to come to our country. So yeah, we still need but I would set the bar at a very, very high level. We need to be. You talked about the NHS there. We need to be recruiting our own people and training our own people up, rather than taking people from developing countries, the brightest and best from those countries, which is further reducing their ability to perform as a country if we're taking the best people from there. So no, we need a whole sea change in the way we deal with immigration.
Net zero is hammering energy bills and British industry while China continues to build these coal plants. Would Restore Britain scrap net zero targets entirely, axe subsidies for renewable, and prioritise cheap British energy, even if it means short-term pain for long-term sovereignty?
Net zero is just a complete and utter nonsense. We've had virtue signaling politicians for decades, all part of the Uni Party. The Conservatives enshrined net zero in law, which is just total madness. We've got some of the highest electricity prices, prices in the world. So how can our manufacturing base, what's left of it, compete with the rest of the world? Importing manufactured goods from China, bringing them back into Britain that could be made here. How green is that? The amount of energy that if renewables were the answer, why are they still being so heavily subsidized? We're importing live trees that have been cut down in North America to the Drax power station to be burnt there to provide fuel. I mean, it's just totally illogical, the whole policy of net zero. And this crisis in Iran at the moment, the Straits of Hormuz that are being blocked up, there's liquefied natural gas that's not being able to get to Europe and particularly Britain. is devastating our economy even further. Petrol prices are going to have to go up, maybe even more on the back of this. We've got the North Sea, which is abundant in oil that we're not drilling for because of heavy, massive taxation policies and the government refusing to give licenses. Yet we're buying oil from Norway, the other side of the North Sea. It's an absolute shambles, and it's just not been thought through properly. And Ed Miliband, just shame on it on him and his department.
You mentioned about obviously the war at the moment. Where do you stand on that? Was Trump right?
Um, I know Restore's policy is that we should keep out of this war. I think we've got a lot of problems within our inner cities, and we have an enemy within this country. A lot we talked about these illegal immigrants coming over that we don't know anything about. They've probably thrown the passports away, yet we've allowed them to stay, all expenses paid in a hotel. We don't know who they are. We don't know where they're from. Some of these communities within our inner cities that hate this country, that have got no allegiance whatsoever. I think we've got so many problems in this country that we need to deal with. We all, the army, the navy, the air force has been so run down. The so-called peace dividend from 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. We've lavished the money that we've saved by not having such a big army, navy, and air force. That money's been lavished on welfare. We have over 9 million people now in this country on benefits. 4 million of those that are not required to look for work. Again, it's a complete and utter mess. So we almost can't fight a war abroad because our numbers of service people are so small. On the other side of it, I can see a country like Iran, if it ever gained nuclear weapons, how it's been firing off rockets to all its neighbors in the Gulf. I can see it from both points. But yeah, so I think we've got enough problems at home to deal with rather than engaging in foreign wars. But I would certainly allow Americans access to our bases and runways and airfields.
Okay. You talked about Britain first on welfare, culture, and security. You mentioned about a referendum on the death penalty. You've also talked about voting rights and, if you like, welfare and social housing reserved exclusively for British citizens. Would you ban the burqa in public?
I certainly would. I think it's a nonsense. I think we've got all these women's lib groups and that have fought tooth and nail for decades for women's rights, and we've achieved equality, and I think making those you'll get a few women in these burqas saying that it's their choice to be in these burqas, but in the main I think most of these women are coerced by male partners, husbands, fathers, to wear that awful garment, and it's got no part of Western society where you can't see the person's face. We rely on talking to people, and to talk to people, communicating with people, you need to see their faces. So yeah, certainly ban the burqa.
Okay. And niqab?
Yeah, I think it's an abomination.
Okay. Paint the picture for me then. 5 years from now, and the history books are written about the desperate fight to save Britain. What do you want the single entry to say about Edward Oakenfull?
um, he did his bit. I'd like to say that, I did my bit and I just tried, and I've stuck my head above the parapet. We talked in a previous interview about losing friendships and things like that. Maybe I did my bit, and I think I'd also encourage anybody else out there that's thinking about getting involved, and they might have a nice cushy lifestyle. They've done well, they've been successful, but your country needs you. I think this is a dire. We're at a real precipice here, and we could go down this precipice. So we need every right-minded person and patriotic person to get on board and do their bit.
So final question then. When your grandchildren sit down one day and ask you, look, why you resigned as treasurer of Advance UK and threw your lot behind Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain, what single sentence would you say as you looked at them in the eye that defines, if you like, your entire legacy for the Britain that you fought so hard to hand them?
I did it for my country. And I think that there's only room for one political party on the so-called right. I did it for my country, getting behind Restore Britain.
And what message would you give to Ben, who will be watching this and saying, traitor?
I, he loves this country, and he's more British than most British people. Um, just let's all get together. Nick Tenconi, if you're watching, David Curtin, Heritage and UKIP parties respectively, come together. Let us, there's only one game in town, and that game in town is Restore Britain. Let's all get behind one entity, do our best to get our country back.
And your message to Nigel Farage?
As you know, he kicked me out of the party 6 days before the general election, live on BBC Question Time. So I've not got a lot of time for Nigel. Nigel, you've done fantastic. You've broken the stranglehold of the Uniparty, Labour, and the Conservatives that have been in power for hundreds of years. You've done an incredible achievement with reform, and I think you've taken it as far as you can. I think I think get rid of your ego, Nigel, and let's all talk. And the diabolical thing that you did to Rupert, the accusations that were false accusations, kicking him out of the party. I'd encourage everybody in reform to get together with Restore and let's change politics for good.
Let's change politics for good. Edward Oakenfull, as always, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. You've been very, very clear and very brave about the decision to come on. I know it affects you personally, and people sometimes have this very public persona, but deep down there are personal issues there as well.
Thank you, Andrew. It's been a pleasure. Hello, I'm Edward Oakenfull. I've just had a grilling by Andrew Eborn on his wonderful show. We've had a great kickabout. I would encourage everybody to like, subscribe, become a member to his show, and you'll get some great content. Thank you.